Dead America, Idaho, Part 6. Dead America, the Second Month, Book 12. Written by Derek Slayton. Narrated by Aaron Smith. Chapter 1. Seattle Rebuild, Day 5. Yvonne walked across the front porch carrying a steaming hot pot of coffee. She looked over towards Captain Kersey, who had been standing in the same spot for nearly half an hour, just staring out over the town as people went about their morning routine. He was so enveloped in thought that he didn't even react as she walked up. "Penny for your thoughts, Captain?" Yvonne asked, and he blinked rapidly, looking over at the woman holding the pot of liquid gold. She shook the container gently, prompting him to extend his mug for a much-needed refill. "Just taking in a moment of peace before the chaos of the day sets in," he admitted. She shook her head as she refilled his cup. "Captain, I am a lot of things," she drawled, "but naive ain't one of them. You talk to me now." He chuckled and nodded, impressed she'd called his bluff. "I'm just admiring what you've been able to accomplish here," he said softly, "and hoping that we didn't screw things up for you by coming here." "You put that thought right out of your head, Captain," Yvonne demanded, jamming a fist into her hip like a stern mother. "You are doing what's right, not just for you, not just for your country, but for everyone. We may look like we're doing all right, but we're just holding on, baby." He took a deep breath. "That's kind of you to say, but—" "But nothing," she cut in, raising her chin. "My sister, God rest her soul, got it in her mind when she turned 18 to move to Florida. Living here in this climate her whole life wasn't to her liking, too cold and drab." She smiled sadly, lost in her memories. "Found her a nice place down there. Sunny skies, sandy beaches, was just living her best life. She did okay for a couple of years, until a hurricane came through, ripped the roof right off of her apartment and destroyed everything she had." She took a deep breath. "Now, in the few weeks after that happened, she managed to survive, sleeping in her car, scrounging up some food, but before too long she knew she needed something bigger. So I went down there with our pops and helped her rebuild. Took quite the effort, but we managed to get her up on her feet again." Kersey smiled down into his mug and took a long sip, finally looking over at the leader of Kuna. "I suppose there is a big lesson I should take from that story?" he said. "Oh, you're right, Captain," Yvonne replied with a humph. "Right now, we're living in that car, and if something big didn't come along soon, that's as far as we'd ever get. Limited supplies, zombies, the chosen. Sooner or later, one or all of those things would overwhelm us." Kersey shook his head and then took in a deep breath. "Well," he finally said, "let's just hope we are that big thing, and not another storm on the horizon." She nodded and patted his shoulder, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "You go and do your best, Captain, and that's all we can ask," she said firmly. Copeland cleared his throat from behind them. "I'm sorry, I'm not interrupting, am I?" he asked quietly. "Oh, honey, you come on up," Yvonne said, letting go of Kersey and waving at the sergeant. "I'm just boring your captain here with family stories. Would you like a cup?" She held up the pot and wiggled it. Copeland smiled and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am," he said. "I'll see you boys inside, then," Yvonne replied, turning back to the door. "I'll have a cup waiting for you." When she disappeared inside, Kersey turned to the sergeant. "How are we looking?" he asked. "Think we have a plan of attack figured out?" Copeland replied. "How do you feel about it?" Kersey asked, cocking a brow. The sergeant tilted his head back and forth. "We've survived missions with worse odds than this," he replied. "Not exactly the ringing endorsement I was looking for," the captain said dryly, letting out a deep breath through his teeth. "There's 7.5 of us up against a small army contained within a hardened target," Copeland shot back. "Without a drone strike in the playbook, I think that's the best we're going to get." Kersey chuckled and nodded, motioning for Copeland to follow. "Come on, let's see what we got," he said. Chapter 2. Copeland and Kersey walked into the office where the rest of the crew were, along with Claudia and Zeke and Yvonne, who handed the sergeant his cup of coffee. Kowalski stood at the whiteboard with Dawson, having drawn a big box to represent the factory grounds. complete with giant skulls at the corners to represent the 50-cal machine gun nests. A gap in the complex at the front and to the left showed the gates, and Kersey walked over, tapping on one of the skulls with a raised eyebrow. Kowalski shrugged. "Figured it got the point across to those in the room who don't know what a 50-cal can do to the human body," he drawled. The captain chuckled and shook his head, conceding the point. He took a seat at the front of the room, and Copeland moved to the front, mug in hand, to start the presentation. "Okay," he said loudly to get everyone's attention. "Welcome to Operation Kick the Hell Out of the Chosen. The guy who comes up with the catchy codename titles is on vacation," Kowalski added. "Or eaten, I forget which." There were some light chuckles in the room before everyone settled down, and Copeland took command once more. "Okay, so here is the fortress, for lack of a better term," he said. "On each of the front corners are towers 20 yards off of the ground with 50-cal machine gun nests. Assuming they have someone competent up there, they will be able to spot us approaching from the open field across the way, well before we're a danger to them." Claudia raised a hand. "However, the field is high grass, couple feet tall, so it is possible to approach without being spotted," she added. "What do you say, Wade?" Kowalski asked, bumping the other sniper's arm with his elbow. "Ready for a slow crawl through the weeds?" "Man, why you gotta drag me into this?" Wade whined. Copeland raised his chin. "Because if this operation is going to have any chance of being successful, we have to take out those gunners," he said firmly. "Is that going to be possible from that angle?" Kersey asked, tonguing his cheek. "It will be if they stand up," Copeland replied. Wade threw up his hands. "Oh, great. That shouldn't be too difficult at all," he said, sarcasm evident in his tone. "Maybe we can just stand up and wave at them. Just hope they don't know how to aim those big-ass guns." "Dawson," Copeland said, motioning to the other soldier. "This is where I come in," Dawson piped up with a nod to the sergeant. "Zeke here has been kind enough to set me up with an expendable 4-wheel drive truck." Zeke grinned. "I've made a little jury-rigged device that will keep it going straight and fast, even over bumpy terrain," he announced. "So, once you two are in position, I'm going to haul ass across the field, leap out before I'm in range, and let the truck slam into the gate," Dawson finished. "That should draw them out long enough for you to do what needs to be done. The hope is that if we can neutralize those gunner nests and draw attention to the front gate, it'll give the rest of us a chance to breach the trucking entrance gate," Copeland said. "Captain, you'll be with myself, Johnson, and Copeland," Bretz piped up, motioning between the three of them. The sergeant picked up a marker and drew smaller boxes within the large box, showing off different parts of the compound. "According to Claudia, there is a safe room at the back of the main factory floor," he said. "It is heavily fortified and well defended, and will require some significant explosives to get inside." "The owner of this particular factory was a special kind of paranoid," Claudia chimed in, clasping her hands behind her back. "Which kind of explains the design. The safe room is relatively small, but they had us set up gunner nests on either side of the door." "More 50 cals?" Kersey asked. She shook her head. "No, just metal barriers a few feet high," she replied. "How are we getting in the door?" the captain asked. Zeke raised a fist. "Thermite," he said simply. Kersey blinked at him in shock, but the more it sunk in, the more he started to nod. "Sounds a little excessive," he said slowly, "but also sounds a little fun. I'm in." "Zeke here has prepared 2 thermite devices," Copeland explained. "Just set 'em down, light 'em up, and don't be anywhere near them when they go off. Should also limit the damage to anyone inside that room." Kowalski's eyebrows shot into the air. "Wait, you mean we aren't shooting this motherfucker on sight?" he demanded. Copeland shook his head. "No, we need him alive," he said, though by the clench of his jaw he wasn't happy about it either. "If there are other militia groups they're working with, we're going to need to extract that information from him. Not to mention if those groups show up, we might need him as a bargaining chip," Kersey added. "Can I at least kneecap the bastard?" Kowalski whined. The captain and the sergeant shared a look, and then shrugged and nodded. "I'll allow it," Kersey said. "Good," Kowalski declared, raising his chin. "Thank you, Captain." Baker raised his good arm. "So what am I supposed to do in all of this?" he asked. You and Claudia are going to be our lookout, Copeland explained, and should the situation arise, our backup. The private raised an eyebrow. A civilian and a one-armed man as backup? He scoffed. What could possibly go wrong? Hey now, Claudia shot back. I know how to shoot. Oh, yeah? He asked, skeptical. She crossed her arms. Yeah, if I still have a home, I could show off my big game collection. But as it stands, you'll just have to wait and watch me work, she said regally. My question is, can you be a competent spotter? Baker blinked at her for a moment, and everyone stared at him waiting for a response. Yeah, I can spot for you, he finally said. Good, then we'll do some damage together, Claudia replied, and then turned back to the whiteboard. Now there's only a single road leading to this place, coming in from the west. There are some large boulders a few hundred yards away from the complex, which should give us a great vantage point to keep a lookout for incoming, and allow us to squeeze off a shot or two if need be. Wade pursed his lips. That's a hell of a shot from 300 yards, he said slowly. Did you or did you not just hear me talk about my big game collection? Claudia snapped, and the sniper raised his palms in surrender. We don't doubt your abilities, Kersey cut in to defuse the situation. But before you open fire, you just make sure we're ready and need you to. I won't fire until Baker here gives me the okay, she promised. Does that work for you? Kersey nodded. I can live with that, he said. Anybody have any questions? Copeland asked, looking around the room. There was a brief moment of silence, and then Kowalski slapped his knees, getting to his feet. Nope, Sarge. Just your standard snatch and grab job while fighting off a superior force. All before reinforcements arrive, he drawled. Easy as they come. There was light, dark laughter around the room, and Kersey raised his hand, whirling it above his head. Okay, everybody get geared up. We're on the clock, he said. Chapter 3. Wade and Kowalski lined up with their respective towers, the former on the right and the latter on the left. The grass wasn't quite as high as Claudia had made it out to be, only a couple of feet tall, but it still provided enough cover as long as they were moving slowly enough. A gentle breeze flowed, rustling the grass and covering up their movements. Kowalski grumbled to himself as he crawled along the cold, solid ground. Despite the sun being up for a few hours, it had done little to warm up the tundra. Just had to be a sniper, didn't you? He muttered to himself. Just had to be the loner type, wanting to be that badass. Shit, man, you could have been a fighter pilot. They get to be loners, too. And you could have had a cool-ass nickname like Iceman or Maverick. He contemplated for a moment, and then shook his head. Be realistic. You'd get stuck with some lame-ass name like Goose or Anteater, which is surprisingly appropriate right now. He paused his crawl as the wind died down, not wanting to give away his position, especially within range of the 50 cal machine gun nests. He held his breath for a few moments before the grass began flowing back and forth again in the wind, and crawled for several more minutes, this time silently. Finally he was in position, the tower looming ahead of him, and he shimmied his rifle from his back. He adjusted the scope as he stared through it to the target. The tower was about 50 yards away, with only the barrel of the machine gun visible. He sighed as he gauged it. This is about as good as it's going to get, he thought. Now I just have to get those pricks to stand up so I can take the top of their heads off. He fiddled with his communicator, keeping the volume at its lowest setting, flicking it to life before speaking. Wade, you in position? He asked quietly. Yeah, close enough, came the reply. Close enough? Kowalski hissed. Not exactly what I want to hear when we're going to have 50 cal rounds headed our way if we fuck up. Relax, I'm good, Wade drawled. Kowalski took a deep breath. All right, let's get this shit show started, he muttered, and then flicked over to a common channel. All right, Speed Racer, you're up, he said. This feels more like a demolition derby stunt show. Dawson came back. Kowalski rolled his eyes. What, you've never jumped out of a speeding vehicle before? He asked. Can't say that I have, Dawson replied. The sniper grinned. Bucket list item about to be checked off, he said. We're in position if you two would like to get on with it. Kersey cut in. Sorry, Cap, Kowalski mumbled, Dawson echoing his sentiments. All right, here goes nothing, the latter said. Dawson turned the key of the four-wheel drive pickup, a mile away from the compound and well out of sight of the gunners. He double-checked the jury rigging that Zeke had done, rope on the steering wheel connected to the base of his seat, with just enough slack for him to be able to force a slight turn. He popped it into drive before pausing, staring out the windshield and taking a deep breath to steady himself. Before hitting the gas, he opened the door, making sure it was ready for a quick exit. Once satisfied, he punched the gas. The truck spun out on the grass, finally catching some traction and speeding off. Dawson floored it, gripping the wheel tightly as it bounced up and down over the rough terrain. Within seconds he came up over a slight hill, revealing the large fortified compound in the distance. "You boys better be on your A-game today," he muttered as he sped along, bouncing all over the place as he got closer and closer. When the truck came within a few hundred yards of the front gate, he hit the cruise control to keep the speed up, and kept a close eye on the gunner towers. An alarm pierced the air, and then he saw movement up in the nests. "That got their attention," he thought, and stayed steady, not wanting to bail too soon. A few seconds later, the unmistakable sound of 50 cal machine gun fire roared over everything else. Bullets peppered the ground in front of him, with the occasional bullet striking the vehicle. "Okay, close enough," he cried, and bailed out of the car before getting within their effective aiming range. He hit the ground hard, bouncing around and rolling, finally coming in to rest in the high grass. He managed to pull himself up just enough to watch the front of the compound. The gunners continued to train their fire on the truck, and the vehicle started to look like Swiss cheese. Bullets ripped through the metal exterior, embedding into the engine and sending the shrill, shrieking sound of metal on metal into the air. The truck slowed as the damage from the onslaught became too much for it. Dawson turned his attention to the nests, just in time for the spotter on the left's head to explode, without even alerting his gunner spotter. A moment later, the gun on Wade's side fell silent, which gained the attention of the trigger man on Kowalski's side. Another shot rang out, narrowly missing the shooter, who quickly moved in once he saw what was going on. The gunman turned his gun on the grass, dangerously close to where Kowalski was. "Shit!" Kowalski hissed, and tried to panic aim, but he couldn't squeeze off a shot before the machine gun started going. Bullets sprayed the area, and the only thing he could do was curl up in the fetal position and hope he got lucky. "Shit, shit, shit!" he cried. Bullets punched the ground all around him, narrowly missing his body. A few seconds later, the deluge of lead stopped, and he stopped screaming obscenities, freezing in tentative hope. "You're welcome," Wade's voice came through the communicator. Kowalski let out a deep sigh of relief. "I owe you," he replied. "So hard." "Damn right you do," Wade quipped. "Cap, you're good." Dawson's voice came through. "Go, go, go!" "Kowalski, Wade, can you see anything?" Dawson came through the communicator. "I can't see shit," Kowalski barked, and Wade scanned the gate through his scope. "Company at the gate," he reported, looking through the grass. He was off to the side, still remaining undetected for the moment. A dozen guys came up to the front gate, taking up positions on the edges and far back from it, shooting through the gaps between the posts. "How many we looking at?" Dawson asked. Wade did a quick head count. "Dozen, maybe more. Can't get a good look," he said. "Cap, we'll hold 'em at the front gate as long as we can," Dawson reported. "Do what you can, soldier," Kersey replied. "Swap," Dawson said, and Wade switched the frequency of his communicator to the closed one between the two of them and Kowalski. "Wade, do you have a shot?" "I can get their attention, if that's what you're asking," Wade replied dryly. "Good. When I give the signal, pop one of them," Dawson came back. "Kowalski, be ready to take advantage of what I'm about to do." "And just what in the hell is that?" Kowalski grunted, clearly agitated. "Something stupid," Dawson replied, letting out a deep breath. "Wade, now!" The sniper popped up to a crouched position, quickly aiming his rifle at the first person he could spot. An older man near the front gate firing a hunting rifle through the opening. He squeezed the trigger, hitting the man's center mass, although from the side. He quickly adjusted his aim, finding a second target and firing. The rushed shot only resulted in a bullet to the shoulder, however, and Wade was out of time, because all the attention turned towards him. "They're looking my way!" he cried as he dove to the ground, hiding himself in the grass once again. "Kowalski, get ready!" Dawson came through, and Wade watched as the soldier didn't wait for a reply. He stood up and ran to the left, firing his assault rifle in 3-round bursts towards the front gate. There were plenty of targets there, but accuracy didn't matter, only drawing attention. He fired wildly, sending several bullets downrange before the attention was fully on him, and then dove headfirst to the ground about 30 yards away. On the other side, Kowalski popped up and quickly took aim, finding a target at the side of the fence. He fired, landing a direct shot to the face. "I have no shot," he came through the communicator, but then Wade saw him aim up to the machine gun nest and panic fire, sending a round smacking into the concrete wall just below the barrel of the gun. "Watch the towers! They're climbing up!" he cried. Wade aimed his scope up at a would-be gunman scrambling out of the way of Kowalski's bullets, and then flicked over to the other tower, where another man was moving around. Wade switched frequencies to the main channel. "Cap, you need to get over to that tower now, or we're toast," he cried. Chapter 4. The foursome of Kersey, Bretts, Johnson, and Copeland stayed out of sight a good 50 yards away from the side entrance. There were a handful of shipping containers at the edge of the parking lot, giving them some cover. They listened to the gunfire in the distance as it grew, and a plume of smoke rose from the front gate. The corporal had a small set of binoculars, and he looked up towards the towers. Meanwhile, the other 3 were focused on the side gate, which was large and metal with wide openings between the beams, just like the front. "Can't anything ever be easy?" Johnson said with a sigh. Half a dozen guards looked out, aiming weapons on high alert. "Don't worry, it's not like everyone here outranks you and can make you the decoy," Copeland quipped. Johnson looked around at the captain, corporal, and sergeant, and then sighed heavily. "Motherfucker," he muttered. Copeland chuckled and then clapped him on the back. "Don't worry, I'd never endanger the mission by sending your slow country ass out there," he drawled. "Hey now," the private snapped, but then seemed to backtrack a bit, realizing this was his ticket out of running into a hail of bullets. "You are absolutely right, Sergeant. That's what real leadership looks like. Captain, you should give this man a promotion." "I'll take it under advisement, Johnson," Kersey replied. Bretts continued watching the tower as the last man dropped down. "Towers are clear," he said. Johnson pulled out an explosive device wrapped up in a ball with a fuse sticking out of it, handing it to Copeland. The sergeant held it up. "Light me up," he instructed. Johnson lit the fuse a 45-second length. Copeland raised his arm. "Give me some cover, boys," he said. Before he could move, Dawson came through the communicators. "Cap, you're good. Go, go, go!" "If nothing else, we got timing," Johnson muttered, and he and the others spread out, rushing to their positions at the corners of various containers. They opened fire, peppering the entire side gate with bullets. As they did this, Copeland emerged and ran as hard as he could, readying the round bomb in his throwing hand. Bullets went ping off of the metal, dropping one gunman with a shot that snuck through. The rest scattered to the sides to avoid being blown away. When the sergeant reached 30 yards of the gate, he planted his front foot and threw the bomb as hard as he could like a baseball. He aimed towards the base of the gate, and it bounced off the ground just a few yards in front, allowing it to roll to a stop. He allowed the momentum of the throw to carry him forward, diving to the deck and taking cover. The others continued to lay down covering fire as the fuse burnt down. The detonation was large and powerful, knocking the gate clean off of its hinges. It didn't fully open, but provided a 5-foot gap on the left side for them to get through. The 2 gunmen on that side hopped out from behind cover and pushed on it, trying to latch it back onto the railing. Copeland drew his handgun and opened fire, sending rounds downrange. smacking into the wall beside the gate and forcing the other two back behind cover. The trio of soldiers behind him came out of the woodwork, moving swiftly across the lot towards his position. They moved in a tactical formation, keeping their rifles trained on the gates. Bretz and Johnson fired off some rounds as gunmen popped their heads out to try to prevent them from moving up, putting them down swiftly. Copeland was concerned with firing when Kersey tapped him on the back, prompting him to get back to his feet. "Good work, Sergeant," he said. "Thanks, Captain," Copeland replied, and the quartet rushed towards the opening in the gate. Bretz took up position on the other side to lay down suppressing fire as they went through the hole. A small building stood about 10 yards away, and one by one they rushed across the opening. Johnson went first, making it to the corner and taking up position. As Copeland went, a few bullets impacted the ground near his feet, and he dove behind Johnson, narrowly avoiding losing a foot. Kersey looked up at a gunman on the catwalk above and quickly aimed and fired, hitting his opponent underneath the chin and sending him tumbling backwards. "Bretz, let's move," he said. The corporal broke position and rushed over, going through the opening and leading Kersey across to join the others. The gunfire from the front gate grew in intensity, and then Dawson came through the radio. "Cap, you need to get over to that tower now, or we're toast." "Needy some bitch, ain't he?" Johnson joked. "Sergeant, take Johnson and help them out," Kersey instructed. "The corporal and I will locate the target." "On it, Captain," Copeland replied immediately. "Come on, Johnson, let's go take us some machine gun nests." Johnson huffed but readied himself, and the two broke from cover, running towards the front of the compound where the main fight was taking place. It was about 70 yards to the opening, with a lot of them along the way, but time was of the essence, so Copeland just ran, aiming towards the factory. Johnson hissed something behind him about being insane, but he had no choice than to follow. They crossed over a few with no incident, but when they got close to the front, the sergeant made it halfway across an opening before quickly leaping back, grabbing Johnson by the shirt and dragging him back behind cover. "What the?" Johnson yelped, but Copeland clapped a hand over his mouth. The private nodded, and Copeland motioned to the opening, miming that he peek around. They peered around the corner at half a dozen armed men staging by the main opening to the warehouse, facing the front gate. They were about 25 yards away from the side entrance and wore full SWAT-quality riot gear, complete with bulletproof shields. Luckily, they didn't seem to have noticed Copeland and Johnson, which gave them a window of opportunity. "How the hell are we doing this?" Johnson whispered. "As soon as we shoot, they're going to be shielded." Copeland thought hard for a moment. If they struck too soon, it would be over. But they couldn't let them get to the front gate, as the trio outside would be pinned down and picked off, either by them or the machine guns. "You got another one of those bombs?" he asked. Johnson reached into his pocket and pulled out a small one, barely the size of a baseball. He tossed it over, and Copeland raised an eyebrow, shaking his head as he turned it over in his hand. "Fuck it. Light me up," he said, and Johnson complied, but immediately froze after. "Wait, what are we doing?" he hissed as the fuse began to go. "Be ready to shoot when this thing goes off," Copeland said, and stepped into the opening, rearing back and throwing the homemade grenade as hard and as high as he could. It went sailing over the heads of the wannabe SWAT members, landing with a thud on the other side. He ducked back behind cover, readying his assault rifle, and Johnson did the same. A few seconds later, a loud boom shook, and the sergeant leapt into the aisle. Just as he'd hoped, the detonation had drawn the attention of their enemies, who now had their backs to him. Both he and Johnson opened fire and rushed towards the line. The bullet spray hit 4 of the men in the back, sending them lurching forward and hitting the ground in pain. One of the men was unlucky, catching a bullet in the base of the skull and dropping him permanently. The 2 men in the middle of the line managed to turn around and get their shields up as Copeland closed the gap. He fired a few rounds into the shield, keeping them pinned down as he got closer. When he was within a couple of yards, he lowered his shoulder and slammed into them, sending them tumbling hard to the ground. One of the men smacked his head on the concrete flooring, knocking him out cold, while the other one was like a turtle that had flipped over, struggling to get up. Copeland aimed his rifle at the man's head, but the enemy lifted his shield to protect his face at the last second. The sergeant tried to kick it away, but before he could, Johnson ran up and fired at the man's legs. As one punched through the enemy's upper thigh, he lowered the shield to protect his family jewels, and Copeland put a bullet in his skull. The 3 wounded men on the ground gathered themselves, the wind knocked out of them due to the bullets hitting their vests in the back. Johnson aimed at the one man on his own, quickly putting him down. Copeland aimed his rifle, pulling the trigger, but the magazine clicked empty. One of the men managed to pull out his handgun, aiming it towards the sergeant, but he made a quick darting move to the side as he fired, narrowly avoiding the shot. Copeland dove forward, grabbing the gun from the injured man, rolling over and landing with his legs on the other man, pinning him to the ground and knocking the gun away. The sergeant drove his elbow into the back of the disarmed man's head before aiming his handgun at the pinned man and firing at near point-blank range. Once that threat was eliminated, he rolled over and put the other man out of his misery. Johnson grunted and slapped his knees. "That worked better than I thought," he admitted. Copeland reloaded his rifle before grabbing one of the riot shields and looking around at the weapons on the ground. He found a semi-automatic riot shotgun and picked it up, checking the ammo to find it fully loaded. "Get you a shield and come on," he said. Johnson did so, slapping a fresh magazine into his rifle in the process. The 2 soldiers moved towards the entrance, looking out at 8 men still standing with several bodies strewn about. Smoke covered the battlefield with the truck outside still ablaze. 5 men stood to their left, with only 3 to the right, and from what they could see there wasn't anyone in the tower on the right. At least, nobody still alive. Copeland changed frequency and dialed up Dawson, Kowalski, and Wade. "We're making a move for the tower that is on your left," he whispered. "If it's not too much trouble, try not to take my head off." "You got it, Sarge," Kowalski replied. "Just hurry. These assholes are getting closer to getting that 50 cal back up." "Sit tight, soldier," Copeland said, and nodded to Johnson. The duo burst out onto the battlefield. Copeland ran straight ahead, Johnson flanking him on the side, holding out the shield to protect them. The sergeant was a few yards out when he slung the riot gun to the side of the shield and opened fire. The slugs ripped through the gunman, and they never saw it coming. He emptied the chamber of 6 rounds into the trio, leaving nothing but a bloody mess. By the time they made it to the tower, the others across the way had taken notice and began firing. Johnson held his own, protecting the 2 of them as they went. "How the hell are we getting up that ladder with them shooting at us?" he cried. Copeland shoved his left arm through the handles of the shield and got ready. "You pin 'em down to give me some cover," he said. Johnson nodded, digging in his heels and poking his rifle to the other side of the shield to open fire. The bullets forced the 5 men to scatter, diving for cover behind some small makeshift barricades they'd put up. "Go!" Johnson yelled, and Copeland started to climb, using only one arm for the rungs on the ladder, but still moving much faster than the average person. A few bullets pinged off of the shield, but the impacts were nothing that would cause him to fall off. Finally, after a few moments, he reached the top, ditching the shield to the ground below and taking cover. He looked across to the other tower, seeing one man kneeling, working on the 50 cal, seemingly waiting for his moment to pop up and open fire. Copeland didn't give him the opportunity, immediately taking out his rifle and aiming up a shot to put a single round through the side of the would-be gunman's head. The sergeant turned and surveyed the fight below, where the 5 men fired at Johnson at the same time, 2 of them beginning to flank the soldier's position. "Move up! Move up!" Copeland bellowed. "I got cover from above!" He aimed at the duo moving to flank and fired a single shot, hitting one of the men in the gut and dropping him to the ground, causing the other one to look up and fire at the tower. Copeland ducked back to the ground for cover, the bullet narrowly missing him and punching into the roof instead. As he got back up into position, he aimed but didn't fire, as the man's head exploded from a sniper round. The 3 remaining men began to fire towards the fence, but the soldiers trained their fire on that trio, quickly overwhelming them. They lay on the ground, dead or near death, and the battlefield fell silent. Copeland whistled down to Johnson. "Get that gate open, then lock it up tight," he called. "I'll cover us from up here." Johnson gave him a thumbs up before going to work, and the sergeant turned to the large 50 cal with a wide grin. "Oh, you are one beautiful sight," he said lovingly, and checked the ammo. He cocked the gun before turning it back towards the factory. "All right, who's going to be stupid enough to try and retake this position?" Chapter 5. Kersey and Bretts took stock of the situation as they watched Copeland and Johnson vanish around the side of the building they were using for cover. "So, how do you want to play it, Cap?" the corporal asked. "Claudia said that the safe room is near the middle of the place," the captain said. Bretts nodded. "You think in the rear is unguarded?" Gunfire erupted from up front, and Kersey shrugged. "If it is guarded, then they are way more intelligent than we gave them credit for," he said. Bretts chuckled. "They don't strike me as master tacticians," he said. "Come on, let's move," Kersey said, and led them away from cover, staying close to the building and moving slowly along the side of it. Bretts kept a close eye on their flank as Kersey reached an opening and peered at the factory floor, seeing no movement. He nodded back to the corporal that he was going in for a look, and Bretts nodded, taking up a covering position. Kersey walked down the corridor, keeping his weapon raised. He moved down the 30 yards of walkway, pausing about 10 yards before it opened up to the factory floor. He pressed himself against the wall for cover, watching half a dozen armed men run by towards the fight at the front. Once they passed, he continued on, reaching the edge and taking stock of the situation. The factory floor was massive, with rows and rows of machines, conveyor belts, and pallets of goods. A walkway loomed above the floor, with multiple armed men all looking towards the front. The captain did a quick count, finding 4 from his vantage point, but he knew there could be more out of sight. He scrutinized the area, hoping to spot the safe room, but he didn't have a clear line on it. He did, however, see something that looked like an open area about 50 yards towards the back of the building. "That's gotta be it," he thought, and quietly backed down the corridor, rejoining Bretts. The duo moved back down the building a bit, finding some cover. "How bad does it look?" the corporal asked as they took a knee. "At least 4 elevated gunmen, which is going to be a problem," Kersey replied. Bretts sighed. "Spot the target?" he asked. "Have a potential about 50 yards back," Kersey replied. "Looks to be 100 yards from the back of the building." Bretts peered around the exterior, finding a ladder just a short distance away that looked like it led up to the catwalk area. "Rock, paper, scissors to see who goes high?" he joked. "You know I'm getting too old to climb," Kersey said with a smirk. "Rational thinking like that is why you're going to outlive us all, Cap," Bretts said, shaking his head. Kersey chuckled. "Get a move on," he said. "Radio when you're in position." The corporal nodded, and the 2 of them moved towards their respective targets. He climbed the ladder, finding the doorway to the catwalk, and once he was up, Kersey made his way towards the back of the building. When he reached the corner, he looked towards the back entrance, quickly ducking back for cover when he spotted a trio of frazzled-looking men standing by a large roll-up metal door that was about halfway open. A slightly elevated dock jutted out where trucks could just back up. "Damn it," Kersey thought. "Guess they aren't as stupid as we'd hoped." He checked his rifle, making sure the magazine was full. He contemplated for a moment before switching the gun to single-fire mode, trusting his accuracy and knowing he had to conserve ammo. Quietly, Bretts's voice came through the communicator. "I'm in position. First target acquired," he said. "Stand by," Kersey whispered. "Got a trio near the back." "Hold position," Bretts instructed, and the line went dead for a moment. Kersey kept watch on the 3 men, who were gripping their hunting rifles tightly and looking around as the gunfire from the front of the building continued to echo. "I don't have a full view," Bretts came back, "but I see at least 2 more men close to that back bay door. So when you start trouble, you can expect more company." "I'll handle them," Kersey replied. "You just make sure nobody takes a shot at me from above." "You say the word, and I'll start picking them off," Bretts promised. Kersey took a deep breath. "Go," he said, and didn't waste time, immediately emerging from behind cover and lining up his first shot. He hit the guard closest to him by the door. 1 shot, 1 kill. Blood splattered onto his buddy a few yards away, quickly putting him into a panic. As he fumbled with his rifle, Kersey aimed at the other man who had just noticed something happening. He took careful aim and pulled the trigger, hitting the man in the chest and dropping him. He immediately swiveled to the fumbled gun guard, taking aim and hitting him center mass just as the enemy seemed to get his bearings. Kersey rushed alongside the bottom of the raised concrete platform, ducking down to remain out of sight. He listened carefully for the rushed footsteps of the guards Bretts had warned him about, and didn't have to wait long. 3 sets of stomping boots rushed outside to the loading dock area, spreading out to find the culprit. Kersey got low, aiming his rifle up, and a moment later, a man leaned over him. He never saw it coming. The bullet ripped through the bottom of his jaw, sending his body lurching back and crashing to the ground. Kersey immediately dove back away from the wall, aiming his rifle towards the 2 other startled men. He hit the first one in the shoulder and the other center mass, and then leapt to his feet to quickly put a bullet into the first one's head to end the threat. Kersey aimed towards the rolling metal door, his breaths heavy, waiting for somebody else to come out and investigate. But nobody came. "Clear," he said into his communicator. "Coming in." "Still got 2 on the far wall," Bretts said. "On it," Kersey whispered back, and climbed up onto the dock, moving to the door and looking up at the catwalk. He could see one man hiding behind a post, occasionally popping out and firing towards Bretts's position. The captain took careful aim, lining up his shot and squeezing the trigger. The bullet found its target, ripping into the man's torso under his armpit. "One closest to the door down," he murmured into the communicator. "Hang tight, Cap," Bretts came back. The captain did as instructed, looking into the distance on the catwalk, where he finally spotted the last remaining gunman. He watched as the man reloaded before emerging to take a shot. Before he could even raise his rifle, he took a round to the head and crumpled to the floor. "Clear," Bretts said. "See if you can get a view of what we're dealing with," Kersey said. "On it," came the reply. Bretts emerged from hiding, moving cautiously down the catwalk, making sure to avoid detection from below as best he could. He moved up 30 yards or so before he got a view of the safe room. "You're not going to like this, Cap," Bretts warned. There was an audible sigh over the communicator. "That bad?" Kersey asked. "Yep," Bretts confirmed, surveying the short metal corridor that had been built straight out from the doorway. A 50 cal machine gun nest stood right in front of it, aiming down the hallway. The nest had metal covering on top of it, but he could see the gun moving ever so slightly, which meant there was a man inside. "Got a 50 cal nest," Bretts said. "Can you take them out?" Kersey asked. The corporal shook his head. "Don't have a shot," he replied. "Wasn't what I asked," Kersey replied, and Bretts blinked in confusion before the insinuation dawned on him. "Pretty sure I can land one of the thermite bombs on top of them," he said. "Attaboy," Kersey replied. The corporal smirked as he pulled out one of the 2 thermite devices and a lighter. "All right, Cap, I'm going to light 'em up," he said. "I'll cover you while you secure the corridor." "Copy that," Kersey replied firmly. Bretts glanced towards the back of the building, spotting the captain moving up towards the room. There was no other movement he could see, thankfully. He lit the fuse, letting it burn down a little bit before tossing it below. He watched the device float through the air, landing with a thud on the roof of the nest. It sat for a moment before one of the gunmen popped a head out to see what it was. Bretts quickly fired towards him, forcing the gunman back under cover. Then the device detonated, sending a blinding light throughout the building. The melting metal was audible, nearly drowning out the cries of the men inside. Bretts swallowed hard. He didn't enjoy having to kill people in such a painful way, but they had to do what they had to do. Soon enough, there was nothing down there but flame and smoke, with no other movement. "Move up," he said, and kept an eye towards the front of the building as Kersey moved up towards the safe room. A trio of men emerged from the front. "3 bogeys, 12 o'clock, he hissed. "Copy," Kersey replied, taking evasive action and finding cover behind one of the machines. Bretts took aim, firing at the man furthest to the right, narrowly missing. The man ducked down and aimed up, firing towards the corporal and forcing him back. The other 2 men with him did the same. Brett crawled backwards on the catwalk, trying to get to an angle where they couldn't hit him. Bullets whizzed by his head, and he tensed. "Got their attention!" he yelled. Kersey took the opportunity to break from cover, hearing the shots up ahead with a good idea of where they were. He spotted the first one on the right, his attention focused on Brett's. The captain drew his knife with his offhand while keeping his rifle aimed at him. He sprinted up, footsteps masked by the gunfire. The man looked down just as Kersey reached him, planting the knife into his chest. Kersey ripped the knife from him, peeking around the corner and seeing 2 men a few yards apart aiming and firing towards Brett's. He aimed his rifle, firing several times rapidly, dropping the first man and then the second. "You good, Corporal?" Kersey asked. "Living the dream, Cap," Brett replied dryly. Kersey scanned the area, keeping his head on a swivel for more incoming. "Anything else coming my way?" he asked. After a brief moment, the corporal said, "Looking good, Cap." "Good. You stay perched," Kersey replied, and then addressed the rest of the team. "Front gate, how we looking?" he asked. "We're secure out here, Captain," Copeland replied. "Everybody come through?" Kersey asked. "Yes, sir," Copeland replied. Relief flooded Kersey, but they still had a lot to do. "Good," he replied. "Get those 50 cals ready for action. Send Kowalski my way. Have Dawson and Wade do a sweep of the compound." "Yes, sir," Copeland said. Kersey turned and looked down the corridor as the thermite began to calm down, leaving a melted mass of metal where the gun nest had been. A few yards behind it, there was a metal door, still standing strong. "All right, Mr. Harris," Kersey muttered to himself. "Hope you aren't too comfortable, because we're coming in to get you." Chapter 6. Claudia and Baker sat atop a hill, watching the battle unfold from afar. The gunfire had been going on for quite some time, and smoke rose from the front gate. Baker watched the action through a pair of binoculars, while Claudia used her scope to keep watch in the opposite direction. "Sounds like your friends are causing quite the ruckus," she said. "What, this?" Baker scoffed. "This is tame compared to what we normally do." She raised an eyebrow. "Tame, huh?" she asked dryly. "Oh yeah, the last month especially," Baker replied. "We've been the tip of the spear since this thing began, carving a path out west so that others could follow." Claudia chuckled. "So, you guys were just like Lewis and Clark, huh?" she asked. "If they had machine guns and high explosives, sure," the soldier replied with a laugh. Claudia continued to scan the distance, and then her partner let out a small, "Hell yeah," underneath his breath. "See something you like?" she asked. "Check out the front gate," Baker said, motioning. She rolled over, adjusting her aim and looking at the gate. When she zoomed in with her scope, Dawson, Kowalski, and Wade were just walking inside. She looked up at the tower, Copeland standing tall and barking out orders. "What do you know? They captured the gunner nests," she murmured, lingering on the sergeant's confident form. "Like you had any doubts?" Baker scoffed. She lowered her gun. "Oh, I always have doubts," she informed him. "Been having doubts throughout this entire catastrophe." "You've been through it, huh?" the soldier asked gently, voice softening. "You could say that," she said, letting out a deep breath through her nose as she resumed her position watching their back. "Family? Friends?" Baker asked. She shook her head. "Nobody I know is still around," she said, and then hesitated. "Well, nobody I know well is still around. I had a few friends who fell ill at the start, and we all know how that turned out. Parents were in a retirement community, and while I don't know for sure, I have sincere doubts that the underpaid staff stuck around to protect them." "So nobody that you know is alive and kicking?" Baker shook his head, eyes downcast. "That's rough." She shrugged. "Maybe," she replied. "I have some former high school classmates that are probably still going. They moved far out into the country, and given their social media postings the last few years, there's a good chance some of them fell in with the survivalists and militia types." "Oh, great," the soldier said with a sigh. "So we might have to fight off some of your former classmates, huh?" Any loyalty questions I should be aware of?" Claudia chuckled. "Hell no," she said. "The only reason I kept in touch with those assholes is because I was on the reunion committee." Baker lowered his binoculars and turned to face her with a curious glance. "I know we just met," he said slowly, "but you don't exactly strike me as the sentimental reunion type." "Blame my parents pushing extra nonsense on me so that my college application would look good," she replied, rolling her eyes. "Got suckered into student government, which little did I know at the time was a lifelong commitment. Joke's on them, though. I went to community college." "Where all you need is a pulse and $50 to get in," the soldier said. "Pulse optional." Claudia barked a laugh, holding her gut, and he blinked at her in confusion. "Hey now, just because I'm injured doesn't mean you have to give me pity laughs," Baker said. "I know that wasn't that funny of a joke." No, Claudia gasped, composing herself. "I just got a mental image of a classroom full of zombies trying to learn algebra. No pulse and all." She shook her head, and the soldier joined in the laughter. "Still, they'd probably have a higher collective IQ than some of the people in my class." "Not the brightest bunch, huh?" Baker asked. She rolled her eyes. "Understatement," she said, and then turned her attention back to her scope and froze. "Shit." "Don't worry, you don't have to deal with those idiots anymore," the soldier said. "No, just you," she quipped. "Look." His knee-jerk reaction was to deliver a snappy comeback, but he sensed the urgency in her voice and looked out with the binoculars. Dust kicked up in the distance, and a lot of it. "Shit," he echoed. "See, told you," Claudia said. "How far out do you think they are?" Baker studied it for a moment, doing some quick calculations in his head. "I don't know," he finally said. "Several miles, maybe? Looks like they're coming in on a dirt road, so that buys us a few minutes. You got the walkie?" "Yep," Claudia confirmed. "Call it in," Baker instructed. She hit the button. "Captain Kersey, we have a situation," she said. There was a moment of silence before he came back. "What is it?" "We have incoming," she reported. "What do you want us to do?" "Sit tight and be ready to act on my signal," Kersey replied. Claudia nodded. "Will do," she said, and put away the radio, her jaw tense. "Hey, you okay?" Baker asked. "I'm good," she assured him, rolling her shoulders. "Just a little nervous." He reached out with his good arm and squeezed her shoulder. "It's gonna be okay," he said. "They aren't going to do anything to you, not with the trap we have laid out." "I just hope it doesn't come to that," she muttered, checking her hunting rifle as the two of them got into the prone position to conceal themselves. All that was left was to wait. Chapter 7. Kersey shook his head as Kowalski came running up to him, both of them standing at the entrance of the corridor leading to the safe room. The sniper took in the carnage from the thermite and then stared at the captain with wide eyes. "Holy hell, what did I miss?" he asked. "Brett's had a little fun," Kersey said with a wave of his hand. "But we have bigger issues." Kowalski stiffened. "What's that?" he asked. Kersey held up his finger to signal that he needed a moment. He clicked on the all-frequency on his communicator. "Everybody listen up, we have incoming," he declared. "Make sure those 50 cals are up and ready, but do not engage until they fire first. Is that understood?" There was a chorus in the affirmative across the communicator. "Good," Kersey replied. "You all know what you need to do, so do it. Kersey out." He let go of the communicator and whistled to get Brett's attention. "Give me the thermite, and then get to the front of the building. Find a spot to perch and wait." The corporal gave him a thumbs up before gently tossing the unlit device down to him. Kersey caught it and then handed it to Kowalski. "Get that set up on the door," the captain instructed. "Want me to light it up?" the sniper asked. Kersey nodded. "Might as well," he said. "If the incoming are his friends, we're probably going to need him as a bargaining chip." "Aw," Kowalski whined. "You're not going to let me shoot him, are you?" Kersey grinned. "I'm a man of my word. You should know this," he said. "I said you could kneecap him, and I stand by that." The sniper's face lit up like a kid at Christmas. Kersey held up a finger. "Only one knee, though," he warned. "Unless you want to carry him to the front gate." "Tough, but fair," Kowalski said seriously. "I accept." He ran off as Kersey checked his weapon. looking around at the bodies of the chosen strewn everywhere. He sighed and shook his head. Such a fucking waste, he muttered under his breath. He let his mind wander for a moment, thinking about their lives before the apocalypse. Jobs, families, just average day-to-day stuff. Now they lay dead in an ammunition factory because zombies roamed the countryside. "It's lit, Cap!" Kowalski cried, cutting through his thoughts as he ran back. The two soldiers stood and watched as the fuse vanished into the device, and almost immediately they had to shield their eyes from the intense light. The sound of metal pouring to the floor was near-deafening, echoing throughout the factory floor. Smoke filled the air as Kersey tapped the sniper to get in position. They each took a side of the makeshift hallway, awaiting their next move. A moment later, panic fire erupted from inside the safe room, missing the soldiers. Coughing and footsteps echoed, and then Kowalski curled around the corner, firing a round into a figure emerging. He shot him in the kneecap, sending him to the floor in pain. "You shot me!" the man cried, and it wasn't Ted Harris. "And I'm about to do it again," Kowalski called, and shot the man in the forehead. Kersey squinted, struggling to see through the smoke, and found a lone man standing a few yards away, doubled over, coughing. "Kowalski," he said, motioning, and the sniper followed his line of vision before firing again, hitting that figure in the kneecap. The man fell and screamed a curse, revealing himself to be Ted Harris. "You keep yelling like that and I'm going to put another one in you," Kowalski warned. Kersey furrowed his brow and quietly said, "Remember our agreement, soldier." "Don't worry," the sniper said brightly. "It'll be in the same knee." The captain shook his head and rolled his eyes as Kowalski kept his handgun on Ted. They moved forward as the chosen leader staggered towards them, reaching behind his back. Kowalski grabbed him by the shirt collar and dragged him out into the corridor, tossing him to the ground and grabbing the handgun in the back of his pants, throwing it aside. "I'm going to be wanting that back," Ted huffed. "It was given to me by my father." Kowalski sneered down at him. "You can file a claim with Lost and Found," he drawled. "They'll get back to you in 3 to 5 weeks. Besides, bucko, you got bigger problems." "Oh, yeah?" Ted hissed a pained laugh. "And what would that be, little man?" "Us," Kowalski snarled. The man burst into peals of laughter, confusing the soldiers. "No, I don't think so," he finally gasped. "If you were my problem, you wouldn't have aimed for my knee. Oh, no." He pounded his index finger into his forehead. "You would have put one right here, and I know you are a good enough shot to deliver that if you want to." He continued to laugh, occasionally groaning in pain and holding his leg. "Should I shoot him again?" Kowalski murmured. "Might be the humane thing to do." "Captain, we have a visual." Copeland came through the communicator. "Coming your way," Kersey replied. "Oh, do you have company, Captain?" Ted asked loudly. "I hope I'm not keeping you from anything." "Pick him up. We have to move," Kersey said, and Kowalski grabbed his shirt collar again, jerking him up violently. "Come on, Chuckles. We have company," the sniper said, and dragged the still-laughing crazed man behind them as they made their way through the factory. Kersey's senses were on high alert, every step growing more and more concerned about what they were about to face. He was relieved, however, that there was no gunfire yet, at least. As they emerged from the front of the building, an SUV was just dragging the flaming wreckage of Dawson's truck from the front gate, revealing half a dozen armored vehicles behind it. Kersey blinked, doing a quick head count, finding easily 24 heavily armed men standing next to SUVs, with 50 cals attached to the top. From the looks of it, these men were a lot better trained and organized than what the soldiers had just faced. "You boys are in the shit now," Ted drawled, and Kowalski smacked the back of his head. "Keep him here," Kersey instructed. "Yes, sir," the sniper replied, stopping about 15 yards from the front gate. The captain continued walking, looking to either side at Dawson set up at the corner of the gate to the left, Wade to the right. As he approached, a man in his late 30s walked towards the gate. He had jet-black hair, and his muscular body was clad in professional-looking combat gear. They met face to face, separated by the gap in the metal beams. So, if you're looking for the supercenter, you hit the main road out there, hang a left, and keep driving until you can't see this place in the rearview mirror anymore, Kersey said casually, motioning with his hands. Once that happens, you just drive another 3-4 hours and you'll find it. The man chuckled, removing his sunglasses and sliding them into his pocket. Whew, boy! You got a little sense of humor on you, don't you? He asked, and wagged his finger. You know, I like that. These are grim times we find ourselves in, what with the dead walking and all that. It's good to keep a little levity. Can't argue with that, Kersey agreed. The man grinned. Well, looky here. Not 30 seconds into meeting, and already we're agreeing on things, he declared. That is a great way to start off a relationship, wouldn't you agree? Can't argue with that one either, the captain said. The man lifted his leg playfully, smacking himself on the knee. All right, we're 2 for 2, he said in an exaggerated and loud, almost mocking tone. You know, you keep this up, and you and your friends here just might make it out of this in one piece. A little early to be making threats, don't you think? Kersey asked, voice firm and no nonsense. Oh, no, you misunderstand, the man replied playfully, hooking a thumb into his belt. I'm not making any threats. Quite the contrary, good sir. I'm merely offering you friendly advice, because that's what friends do. They look out for one another, don't you agree? The captain pretended to contemplate for a moment, and then played along with his opponent's attitude. Another valid point, he finally said. There we go, his opponent said with a grin. And just like that, we're back on track. Kersey matched his playful tone, leaning in as if they were sharing a secret. So, friend, he drawled, what brings you out this way? I may be new to the area, but this doesn't exactly strike me as a popular tourist destination. You know, my friend, the man said, and then trailed off, raising a hand. Wait, it just occurred to me that I have been rude and failed to introduce myself. My name is Wayne, and you are? Captain Kersey, the soldier replied with a nod of his head. Captain Kersey? Wayne declared with an exaggerated shake of his head. Captain? He let out a long, impressed whistle. Did you hear that, boys? They sent a bona fide captain to our little neck of the woods. Whew! To what do we owe this great honor, Captain? Kersey smirked. He'd found the exact response he'd been looking for. Well, Wayne, I heard through the grapevine that this part of Idaho was a wonderful tourist destination, he drawled, whirling a hand above his head. Once I heard that, I had to see for myself. His opponent burst out laughing. To some, it may have sounded hysterical, but it was carefully controlled, and Kersey was beginning to understand it would be a mistake to underestimate this man. You are quite the clever little buckaroo, aren't you? Wayne asked, wiping pretend tears from his eyes. I can see why that big old military put you up there as a captain. Handful of words, and we are right back on the topic you want to discuss. That was smoother than baby shit, I gotta give that to you. I'll always take a compliment, Kersey quipped, cocking his head, no matter who it's from. Wayne clucked his tongue, pointing a warning finger. Whoa now! I thought we were friends, he said. No need to get salty with me there, Captain. No offense, but when 6 armored vehicles jam-packed with armed men and 50-cal machine guns roll up to my front doorstep, I am a little on edge until I know what their intentions are, Kersey replied smoothly. Wayne tilted his head back and forth. Very fair, sir, very fair, he conceded. I will take that as an apology on your part, and for the record, I do accept it. He turned, putting a finger to his chin and beginning a slow pace back and forth across the front gate. Now, as to why we are here, seems as though we have a mutual friend in Mr. Ted Harris over there. Ted didn't say a word, simply standing there seething over his blown-out knee. Come on now, Ted, Wayne said, stopping his movements to stare expectantly at the chosen leader. I drove a long way to be here. The least you can do is acknowledge me. Ted wrinkled his nose and gave a little wave, and Wayne grinned, giving him a mocking wave back. There you go, he drawled. That wasn't so hard now, was it? He turned back to Kersey and opened his mouth again, but Ted threw up his hands. "Just overrun them!" he yelled quickly. "There's only 7 of them!" Kowalski punched Ted in the kidney to shut him up, and the chosen leader doubled over with a pained grunt. "Whoa! Settle down there, cowboy. No need for violence," Wayne said, shaking his head at the sniper. "Now, while you're not exactly on my good side, I can say with utmost confidence that you're not on my bad side as of yet. If you'd like to keep it that way, and I'd suggest that you do, I'm going to politely ask you that you don't hurt my friend there any more." He cocked a brow. "What do you say? Can you do that one little favor for me, cowboy?" Kowalski glanced at Kersey, who gave him a small nod. The sniper jutted out his chin. "I can do that for you, Wayne," he said with a forced joviality that was nothing like his usual bright tone. "Well, hot damn! Look at me!" Wayne bellowed with a whoop. "2 potential friends in just a few minutes. This is turning out to be one humdinger of a day. Now as for you, Ted—" He paused, staring at the chosen leader dead in the eyes. He dropped the playful tone and banter, his gaze serious and menacing. "You open your mouth one more time without being told to," he warned, so much venom and force in his tone that even Kersey's blood ran cold. "And I'm going to toss Cowboy there my hunting knife and instruct him to run it across your gut, rip out your lower intestine and strangle you with it." He sneered, drawing said knife and wiggling it in the air. "Now, I have tolerated your existence with your little chosen mantra, but that was only because you had something I needed, something that was easier to let you do for me rather than having me and mine come and take it from you. But due to your incompetence, or your arrogance, or both, you can no longer provide that service to me. The only reason I haven't given Cowboy here my blade is because your women and children are under my protection, taking up my space and using my resources. You are going to work off that debt." He spread his arms. "In the meantime, however, you need to shut your fucking mouth and let the adults continue conversing. Do I make myself clear?" Ted nodded furiously in agreement, his eyes wide with cold fear, and the soldier stayed stock still. Kersey's brain did overtime with all of the information he'd just learned. "Good," Wayne said, and then sheathed his knife, clapping his hands and turning back to the captain with a bright, friendly expression, like flipping a switch. "So, Captain, we do have ourselves a bit of a situation here, don't we? Now, despite us becoming fast friends, I fear as though this might be a short-lived friendship if we don't resolve this difficult situation we find ourselves in. Wouldn't you agree?" "I would," Kersey replied with a nod. "I would." "Now, assuming that our mutual friend here was correct when he so eloquently screamed out your force strength, I think it's safe to say that we have you outnumbered," Wayne continued, tapping his chin. "I'd even go so far as to say that we have you outgunned as well." "You sure about that, Wayne?" Copeland bellowed from atop the tower, and all eyes raised to him. The serious-looking sergeant stood up there, sternly pointing the 50 cal machine gun down towards the SUVs. Wayne smirked and wagged a finger up at the tower. "Well, what do you know? Another friend," he declared loudly. "Now, I am a man who can admit his faults, and who can also admit when he's wrong. You just might be on par with us on firepower." He leaned in, giving Kersey a conspiratorial wink. "Now, I'm going to share a secret with you. I'm a little bit psychic. My wife is always getting on me because I'll say things that she's thinking, and it freaks her out a little bit. Maybe there's something to it, or maybe it's just dumb luck, but I think I'm pretty spot on with this prediction." He spread his arms wide. "Ain't a man standing here that wants to find out what it's like to get hit with one of those 50 cal rounds," he declared. "Am I right on that, Captain?" "I've seen it happen to quite a few people," Kersey replied with a nod. "I will tell you that if you are on the receiving end of one of those rounds, there won't be enough of you left to worry about it." Wayne barked a laugh. "Good to see you're having a little fun with this situation, Captain," he drawled. "But as fun as it is, the fact remains that it is serious, and I'm afraid I can't leave until I get it resolved." "What a coincidence," Kersey shot back in the same tone. "I'm in the exact same position, So seeing as how you are the guest, I'm going to let you make the first suggestion on how to resolve it." "That is mighty generous of you, Captain," Wayne said with an appreciative grin. "And I believe I have a solution that benefits us both." Kersey nodded. "I'm all ears," he invited. "Now, you may not have realized that you are trespassing," Wayne said, and held up a hand, shaking his head. "However, I'm not casting blame or any of that. I understand you're not from around here, so you don't know the lay of the land. I get it. I've been there. No harm, no foul." "Mighty generous of you," Kersey quipped. Wayne winked at him. "Just the type of person I am," he drawled, hooking a thumb into his belt. "Can't help it. Always been that way." He clucked his tongue again. "As I was saying, through no fault of your own, you're trespassing. Now, being the fair-minded individual that I am, I'm going to give you free passage to wherever you would like to go. My men won't fire on you. We won't track you down. I don't even mind if you head back to that quaint little town of Kuna and set up shop for the rest of your days. You are the master of your own destiny, and I am in no position to tell you otherwise. The only thing I insist on is that you don't stay here." He waved his hands around his head. "Because this is my place." Kersey tongued his cheek. "I assume you have the proper documentation to prove ownership of this property?" he asked. Wayne paused, and then let out a disappointed laugh, wagging a finger at him. "Oh, Captain, I thought we were going to be friends," he said. "I implore you not to go down this road, because it does not end well." "I agree, it does not end well," Kersey said, and inclined his head towards his captive. "Why don't you ask our mutual friend Ted there how it ended for him?" Ted opened his mouth, but Wayne shot him a glare, and the chosen leader snapped his jaw shut immediately. Wayne took a deep breath, ran his tongue over his teeth, and addressed Kersey, this time in a far less playful tone. "Captain, do you have any idea what you're up against?" he asked. Kersey shrugged. "Couple dozen guys cosplaying as real soldiers," he shot back. Wayne's gaze darkened, but he didn't get angry. His tone was more controlled menace, a very dangerous kind of composed rage. "Every man standing here wore the exact same uniform that you have on, myself included," he said firmly. "We did it because we thought it was our duty to this nation. In reality, we were just serving billion-dollar corporations and tycoons who couldn't give a rat's ass about us. I took in battered and broken men and women who served with honor, only to be abandoned by the very government they swore to protect. And when all of this started, we stepped up and did the job that you and your government refuses to do, which is to protect the citizens of this nation. While you cut and ran, we stood and fought." Kersey opened his mouth, but Wayne held up a hand, pressing on. "Now, I've heard the rumblings about what's been going on in Seattle," he said. "And that's all good and well. It's also far too little, far too late. And if what I've been hearing is correct, you don't have a leg to stand on against us. We stretch from here all the way to the coast and damn near into Canada. Before the war, a lot of us had our differences. But it's amazing how quickly we can come together in a crisis. We are a lot more formidable than you or your superiors will ever want to admit." Kersey took a breath. "Be that as it may, I know. You have your orders," Wayne mocked, rolling his eyes with a chuckle. "I swear, if I had $1 for every time that line was used on me, I would have been rich enough to have the military do my bidding." He pressed his palms together. "Now, I want to be clear about something, Captain. My fight is not with you. If I had to guess, I'd say you have a little voice in the back of your head nodding in agreement with everything I've said. No, my fight is against the corrupt system that put you here in the first place. So please, help me be able to sleep in peace. Leave here, and don't make me do something that's going to keep me up at night. Because I assure you, every man here is willing to sacrifice their lives to secure this facility." Kersey took a deep breath and then pursed his lips, staring at Wayne's expectant expression and contemplating his next move. "Can I ask you a question?" he finally asked. His opponent nodded. "By all means, Captain," he said. "Do you have your men on a tight leash?" Kersey asked. Wayne squared his shoulders. "They're the best trained soldiers you're going to find," he declared, and then sheepishly glanced up at Copeland. "Outside of your own, of course." Kersey nodded. "And I have your word on that?" he asked. "They won't do anything unless I give the order," Wayne promised. The captain raised a finger. "One more question," he said. "Shoot," Wayne replied, cocking his head, eyes curious. "Do you trust me not to pull a fast one on you?" Kersey asked. They stared at each other for a tense moment, locking eyes, judging the sincerity of each other. "I do, Captain," Wayne finally said with a nod. "Good," Kersey said, and then, into his communicator, instructed, "Baker, driver's side mirror." A second later, the side mirror on the driver's side door nearest Wayne exploded, the gunshot echoing in the distance. Wayne immediately put up his hand, signaling to his men to hold tight. "Guessing that's your way of saying our mutual friend here doesn't know what he's talking about," he drawled. "I have nothing against you or your men," Kersey said honestly. "I know you're out there trying to survive in this hellscape, and quite frankly I respect that. But I need you to understand this. If you try to move on this facility, I can promise you that your 50 cal gunners will never get a shot off." He pointed to Copeland. "I can also promise you that mine will. There has been more than enough bloodshed for one day. Please do not make me coat my hands with more blood." Wayne twisted his lips back and forth, taking in a deep breath, and glanced back at his men, who were on edge from the warning shot. He tisk-tisked, turning back to Kersey. "I'm guessing you're about to give me the same offer I gave you," he asked. The captain nodded. "All except that bit about going to Kuna," he amended. "As far as you're concerned, they're out of the game. They didn't ask for any of this. I brought this mess to their doorstep. They're just like you, people just trying to survive this ordeal." Wayne extended his hand to shake. "You have my word, Captain. No harm will come to Kuna," he declared, "so long as they remain out of the game." "I will make sure they understand that," Kersey promised, shaking hands with the man. "Well, I suppose that concludes our business for the day," Wayne said, hooking a thumb into his belt. "If you don't mind, my men and I have a bit of a drive ahead of us." "By all means," Kersey said, waving a hand. Wayne nodded and began to walk off, but when Ted made a noise of agitation, though not speaking any words, he paused. "Oh yeah, almost forgot," Wayne said, turning back around. "Don't suppose you could turn him over to us, could you?" He waved a hand flippantly in the man's direction. "Honestly, if it were up to me, I'd be more than happy to let Cowboy there practice his trick shots on him. But he's really caused me all kinds of headaches today, and I really need to have him work that off. Gotta set an example for everyone, you know." "What did you have in mind?" Kersey asked, cocking his head. Wayne shrugged. "Doing the stuff nobody else wants to do," he said. "Tending to the fields, washing the clothes, stuff like that." Kersey shook his head. "He needs to do something worse than that," he said firmly. "Why?" Wayne asked, cocking his head. "Because the motherfucker had slaves," Kowalski cut in, barely containing his shaking rage. "Promised them safety, but if they weren't up to his standards, he locked them away and made them do things around the compound. And in some cases, made them the men's entertainment. I'm not talking about singing and dancing." Wayne's eyes went dark with rage, staring hatred daggers at Ted. He clenched and unclenched his jaw, and Kersey could almost see the tortures that the man wanted to inflict. "Captain, you have my word that this maggot will regret the day he was born," Wayne growled. Kersey nodded. It was clear this man was of different stock than the Chosen. "I believe you," he said, motioning to Kowalski, who gave the now reluctant Ted a shove. "You know, it's a shame," Kersey continued. "What is?" Wayne asked. Kersey sighed. "If it weren't for the apocalypse, I think you and I could have had some fun throwing back a few and swapping stories." he said. Wayne smirked. "It's not too late, Captain," he drawled, "and we're not hard to find." He grabbed Ted by the scruff of his shirt and dragged him across the ground to the SUV. When the chosen leader cried out in pain, Wayne kicked his gunshot wound. "You open your mouth again and I'm putting another one in you." Kowalski let out a sigh of relief at the sight, sidling up next to Kersey as Wayne nodded towards them, got in his SUV, and led the convoy back the way they'd come. When the convoy was out of sight, the captain's shoulders relaxed. "That was one hell of a fucking bluff, Cap," Kowalski blurted, running his hands through his hair. "Only question is, did he buy it?" Dawson asked as he sauntered up. Kersey shook his head. "I get the sense that we'll find out soon enough," he replied. "Get on a secure channel back to Kuna. Tell them to get men here quick. I want 2/3 of the shooters they have here defending this place." "Yes, sir," Dawson replied, and ran off. "Kowalski, Wade," Kersey continued, "I need sniper positions, both inside and outside the gates." "Yes, sir," both men replied in unison, and headed off. Kersey whistled up to Copeland, who waved down to him. "When Baker gets back, I want him manning your gun," Kersey called. "I want you, Brett, Dawson, and Claudia getting this place fortified." "Yes, sir," the sergeant called back. "Where are you going to be?" "Kuna," Kersey replied. "Gotta hope that they have a radio set up strong enough to reach Seattle." "You think Wayne was telling the truth?" Copeland asked. "That the numbers are that big?" Kersey shook his head. "I think it's too serious of a claim to not let General Stevens know," he replied. "If he's bluffing, then there's no harm." "And if he's not bluffing?" Copeland asked. Kersey took a deep breath. "Then we could be facing a war." Chapter 8. Kersey was deep in thought as he drove his SUV back to Kuna. He processed everything that had transpired, but he also had to keep his head on a swivel to make sure he wasn't being followed by any of Wayne's men. It kept him on high alert and his mind reeling at the same time. A dangerous cocktail. The prospects of a full-scale war against a well-armed militia terrified him. Even when they had the tactical and equipment advantage, like they had when they were fighting overseas, they'd lost so many good men. Now, though, with limited resources, no intelligence, and a major city to defend, Kersey could clearly see how the entire situation could spiral out of control quickly. And that wasn't even adding in the zombie problem, or disease, or famine. But he couldn't focus on the what-ifs now. He needed to focus on the task at hand, which was getting to Kuna and making contact with Seattle. He drove up towards the town, relieved to see that the citizens had done a good job of clearing the main road from the previous battle. Corpses were stacked 5 high on the side of the road, creating a horrific scene, not to mention the smell. Several men used heavy diggers to make a mass grave for them in the near-frozen fields lining the road. It saddened Kersey, thinking about the lives they'd once had and their undignified end. But mass graves were just a sign of the times. As he approached the gates, they opened for him. A few of the gunmen on top waved him in excitedly, and as soon as he parked on the other side, Yvonne approached immediately. "Captain, so good to see you alive and well," she gushed. He shut the door to the SUV and nodded. "Thank you," he said with a smile. "Were you able to set up what I need?" "Oh, yes. Zeke is putting the finishing touches on it now in my office," she assured him. "Come walk with me." They made their way through the community, which was looking a bit sparse population-wise. Kersey's brow furrowed as he looked around. "I know you requested a few shooters, Captain," Yvonne said as she took in his expression. "But your man who called it in sounded a bit worried, so I sent in a few extra men." Kersey stopped, raising his hands. "Yvonne, you shouldn't have." "You hush your mouth, Captain," she cut in sternly. "We are very well defended here. You and your men put your lives on the line to get that facility, and I'm going to make sure it's taken care of. Not everybody I sent are shooters. There were a few welders and junkers in the mix of people you liberated from the Chosen. Figured they might be of some use to you to get that facility ready for a fight." Kersey nodded, and they began walking again. "Thank you, Yvonne," he said quietly. "Oh, you're welcome," she said, giving his shoulder an affectionate squeeze as they approached her office. "Now, you go on and get inside there. Zeke will set you up. I'm going to go get you a bite to eat. Can't let my favorite soldiers go hungry now." She winked at him, and he offered her a warm smile. "I appreciate it," he said, and watched her walk off before glancing up to the roof, where a couple of men were securing some large antennas and running cables. "Good to know you do nothing small around here," he thought, and shook his head, walking inside. In Yvonne's office, Zeke had set up an ancient ham radio, attaching all manner of cables to it. He leaned out the window facing up. "All right, is that the last one?" he yelled. "Everything's hooked up," somebody yelled back. "Should be good to go." "Hang out for a minute just in case," Zeke called. "Yup," the person said. "Impressive setup," Kersey said, waving a hand at the radio. Zeke blushed a bit, wrinkling his nose. "Sorry it's not high-tech and fancy like you're probably used to," he said. "But this was the best I could do on short notice." "Nothing to apologize for," Kersey assured him. Zeke held up a hand. "Well, let's wait and see if it works before you say that," he replied. "Just the effort you're putting in is worthy of praise," Kersey insisted. Zeke reached down and flipped on the radio, watching as the light behind the dial illuminated. "Time to see if I get an extra gold star or not," he murmured. Kersey sat down in front of it and then looked around, realizing that the radio was the only thing in the office that had any power. "How the hell are you powering this thing?" he asked. "I had a few small solar panels we rigged up," Zeke said, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. "We don't have a battery for it, though, so you're going to be limited to talking during the day." "This time of year in this part of the country," Kersey joked. "That's what, a good 45 minutes a day?" Zeke chuckled. "Maybe 50 if you're lucky," he corrected. Kersey took a hold of the dial and adjusted it to the correct frequency. After a few moments, he got it where he thought it should be and took the mic. Seattle Command, this is Captain Kersey," he said. "Come back." He waited, the moments of silence dragging on. "Seattle Command, do you copy?" he asked, and waited again through more silence. "That's worrying," Zeke murmured. Kersey shook his head. "No, it's perfectly normal," he assured him. "I have a special command frequency, kind of a direct line to the top of the food chain, if that makes sense. It usually takes them a minute to recognize me." As if on cue, the line sprung to life. "Go for command," a man said. Kersey leaned forward, clearing his throat. "This is Captain Kersey, with a priority request for General Stevens," he said. "Stand by," the man replied. Zeke raised his eyebrows. "Perks of being a captain, huh?" he asked. Kersey chuckled. "Perks of always taking on the most dangerous missions the General can think of," he corrected. "Downside of being popular, huh?" Zeke asked. Kersey chuckled again, shaking his head. "Something like that," he said. "Please hold for General Stevens." Command came back, and Kersey took a deep breath. "Here we go," he murmured, getting comfortable.
"Captain Kersey."
Stevens' deep voice came through the speaker.
"Good to know you are still alive and kicking, sir."
Kersey smiled. "Good to still be alive and kicking, General," he said.
"Status report,"
Stevens prompted. The captain cleared his throat again. "We have managed to secure a few operational facilities, or at least facilities we can easily make operational," he explained.
"Supplies?"
the General asked. Kersey shook his head. "Unknown, sir," he replied. "We have had our hands full, so we haven't been able to do a full inventory."
"Best guess?"
Stevens asked. The captain wrinkled his nose. "Moderate," he finally said. "Should be able to outfit a significant portion of the troops with ammunition."
"Well, it's a start, and puts us in a better position than we started,"
Stevens said.
"That's some fine work, Captain."
"Thank you, sir," Kersey said dutifully.
"How are your men?"
the General asked. The captain swallowed hard. "Baker is wounded, but still functional." He gritted his teeth. "Mac and Moss are KIA."
"I'm sorry, Captain,"
Stevens replied, his voice falling.
"I take it that resistance was more than just the undead?"
"Yes, sir," Kersey replied. "Significant resistance in the area. Group of assholes who called themselves the Chosen." The General scoffed.
"Oh, please tell me you eliminated them,"
he demanded.
"With a name like that."
Zeke snorted, and Kersey shook his head. "Yes, sir, they have been neutralized," he reported. "However, we have another situation that is concerning."
Go on,
Stevens prompted. Kersey took a deep breath. Sir, just a few hours ago we were confronted with militia, he began.
Like the Chosen?
Stevens asked. The captain shook his head. No, sir, he replied. The group we eliminated struck me as a bunch of civilians who thought they knew what they were doing because they hunted on the weekends. The militia we encountered today looked to be highly trained, most likely former military. More concerning, however, is that they were very well equipped. Armored vehicles, 50 cal machine guns, full combat gear. There was a moment of silence before Stevens asked.
Did you get a sense of their strength?
Difficult to say, sir, Kersey admitted. I spoke at length with who I assume was their leader. In his words, they have communities stretching from here to the coast and up into Canada.
Do you believe him?
The general asked. Kersey took in a deep breath through his nose. This was the million-dollar question. If it were me, sir, I would have inflated my numbers to show strength, he admitted, but also kept it believable so that if a move was made against me, I could back up the boast. Their leader struck me as someone who would have a similar mindset.
So, you think it's a credible threat?
Stevens asked slowly. I believe we need to approach it like they are a threat to what we are trying to accomplish in Seattle, Kersey replied. This part of the country has always had a reputation for being anti-government, and given our abandonment of them when all this began, the conditions are right for a significant uprising. The general paused.
People are angry, huh?
He asked. Yes, sir, Kersey said. Even the people in the town of Kuna, who have been gracious enough to help us this week, aren't pleased with what we did. He took a deep breath as Zeke stiffened beside him. I think when you combine that with the amount of abandoned military bases in the region that might still have had lots of usable gear, we might have a fight on our hands if we don't tread lightly. There was some mumbling in the background, muffled, as if the general had covered his microphone with his hand.
Understood, Captain,
he finally said, and then some more quiet mumbling.
Apologies. Just needed to confer with some others in the room.
Of course, sir, Kersey replied.
Given these new developments, and how vital your position is to the success of the mission in Seattle, I'm going to have you and your men remain in the region,
Stevens finally said.
I need you to tell me what you need in order to fully secure the area.
The captain cleared his throat and leaned forward. More men would be a wonderful start, sir, he said. With the civilian help, we have more than enough to fight off any moderately sized undead assault. If the militia decides they want to drive us out, and they have even a fraction of the numbers they claim, they'll be able to do it.
Understood, Captain, the general replied. I'm being told that the truck convoy will be at your position within the next 60 hours. It's only a handful of men, but it's a start. I will also begin assembling a squad to send your way. Jet fuel is at a premium, but I will scrounge up what I can and get reinforcements to you by the morning.
Thank you, sir, Kersey said with a smile.
Is there anything else, Captain?
The general asked. Kersey leaned forward. How's the situation there in Seattle? He asked, tone conversational, but genuinely curious. There was a long pause, and the captain swallowed hard. Going that well, is it? He asked. Stevens sighed.
We are very much in a danger zone right now, Captain, he replied, his voice exhausted. Things we assumed we'd have access to, we don't. Number of civilian survivors are higher than expected, putting a strain on resources. Your success has been the only bright spot in an otherwise dreadful week. Kersey straightened his shoulders. Will you level with me, General? He asked. There was some more mumbling on the other side. Apologies, Captain. Stevens came back. I was advised not to speak any more on the subject for risk of prying ears, but I politely reminded them that I outranked them, and they were dismissed. Kersey chuckled, shaking his head. Good to know the apocalypse hasn't changed you, General, he said. Captain, we are very much on the brink up here, Stevens admitted with a sigh. Everything is trending in the wrong direction, and if what you say about the militia is true, we could very much lose everything we've worked for. This makes your mission even more vital. Kersey nodded firmly. Yes, sir, he said. You need to hold those facilities at all cost, the general insisted. Fight to the last man if you have to. Without the ammunition coming out of there, we don't have a fighting chance. If Seattle falls, so does the country. We won't have a functioning government, nor a way to ever effectively rebuild. The next few weeks and months will determine if we have a future or not."
"I understand, sir," Kersey replied firmly. "We will hold the line."
"See that you do,"
Stevens replied.
"And if we somehow come out the other side of this, I'm going to owe you a drink."
The captain laughed. "General, with all due respect," he drawled, "I'm pretty sure you owe me a full bar at this point."
"Perhaps I do,"
Stevens replied, joining in the laughter.
"The good news is, if we get solidified up here, you'll have your choice of one. Might have a small zombie infestation, but you seem capable of handling that."
"Yes, sir, I can," Kersey replied.
"Give me an hour, and I'll have troops ready to send your way,"
the general promised.
"Figure out a landing spot in the meantime."
"Yes, sir," Kersey said.
"Good luck, Captain,"
Stevens said. "Thank you, sir," Kersey replied. The line went dead. Then Kersey leaned back in his chair, lacing his hands behind his head and letting out a deep breath. Several moments of silence passed until Zeke cleared his throat nervously. "That's a lot to digest, huh?" he asked. "Understatement, my friend," Kersey murmured. "Understatement." "But you've faced worse situations, right?" Zeke asked, his voice a little strained. The captain shook his head, letting out a deep breath. "Can't say that I have," he admitted. "We've already been the superior force, but now we're in dangerous times." "Don't worry," Zeke said, raising a victory fist. "I'm sure if things go really badly that Yvonne will let you stay here." Kersey chuckled, shaking his head. "Thanks," he said with a grin. "That's appreciated." "Any time," Zeke replied. "So what do you say we figure out where these boys are going to land?" Kersey said, slapping his thighs. "I'll grab the map," Zeke declared, and headed off to dig it up. The captain took in a deep breath, sinking back down into his mind. It raced with everything he'd just heard. In all of his years, he'd never heard General Stevens be so dismayed, so pessimistic about a situation. Even if a mission looked like it would be suicide, Stevens was usually upbeat. But not this time. The concern in his voice, the lack of optimism, the utter exhaustion. It was troubling, to say the least. But it was out of his hands. Kersey knew this, logically. The only thing he could do was play his part, do his duty, and give the survivors in Seattle a fighting chance. Give the world a fighting chance. Chapter 9. Seattle Rebuild, Day 8. The sun peeked over the horizon, bathing the factory in a warm orange glow. Kersey emerged from the safe room, which they'd cleaned up and turned into a base of operations, not just for the plant, but for the entire region. "Zeke, how are we looking?" he asked as the younger man approached. "Production shall be back online today," he replied with a grin. "We have the generators hooked up and ready to go, just waiting on fuel to be delivered." Kersey cocked a bright smile. "And you found fuel?" he asked. "Yes, sir, I did," Zeke said. "Private farm about 30 miles out. Had a tank installed that the Chosen didn't raid. Should get us a few thousand gallons, which will kickstart production." "Excellent," Kersey said, clapping him on the back. "Good work. Now what about solar?" Zeke jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "I've spoken with the truck drivers who are due here any minute, and they gave me the specs on what they are carrying. We have an area plowed and ready to install, but things might be going a bit slower." "Why?" Kersey asked, brow furrowing. Zeke motioned for him to follow him outside, and as soon as they set foot through the front doors, the captain understood. "Stuff's been falling for a few hours now," Zeke said, waving a hand. "Made the ground hard as a rock." Kersey held out his palm, letting the fluffy flakes fall onto it. He took a moment to admire the beauty of it before it melted against his skin, and then nodded. "I understand," he said. "Do what you can." "I'll do my best," Zeke promised. Kersey offered him a smile. "I know you will," he said. As Zeke headed off, the captain wandered towards the front gate. As he approached, he could hear Kowalski complaining as he and Wade climbed down from the 50-cal towers, to be replaced by the next shift of soldiers. "Of all the places we could have picked to rebuild, why did we have to pick a place where it snows?" Kowalski whined. Wade chuckled. "Not a fan of the cold?" he asked.
The cold I can handle, but this snow bullshit is bullshit,
Kowalski said, toeing the ground with his boot.
Cold, wet, no matter what you're wearing, you feel damp. Throw in limited visibility and it's just perfect.
Captain, Wade said loudly as they turned to face their superior.
Request permission to go AWOL so I don't have to listen to this today.
Kersey chuckled. Sorry, soldier. Gonna need you today, he said.
Well, never hurts to ask,
Wade quipped. The captain shook his head. No, it does not. Wade laughed as Kowalski rubbed his arms and bounced up and down beside him to keep warm. How are the defenses looking? Kersey asked. Wade cocked his head.
You want to take this one?
He asked.
Hell no, Kowalski snapped. I want to go warm up.
Wade rolled his eyes.
Defenses are looking good, Captain, he said. General Stevens did us a solid with those reinforcements. We have 4 teams of snipers and spotters spread out half a mile to the north and west. Have pretty much that entire area accounted for. If anybody tries to come at us, not only will we know about it, but it'll make them think twice about it.
Kersey nodded appreciatively. And how are we looking on the zombie front? He asked.
Wade jerked a thumb over his shoulder. Sent a couple of recon teams to the east of downtown, he reported. The cold weather has been slowing the ghouls down, so moving them out has been more time-consuming than we had anticipated. At last count, they've drawn a couple thousand or so away from us and out into the wilderness.
Good, Kersey replied. Tell them that if those things are moving too slow to make luring them viable, to fall back to Kuna. I know we have Wayne's word that Kuna is off limits, but just in case, I want that town to be a fortress that can rival this one. Wade nodded sharply.
Yes, sir,
he said. Speaking of turning this place into a fortress, Kersey continued, have you seen Sergeant Copeland? The sniper nodded and motioned behind him.
I believe he's at the truck gate entrance, sir, he said.
Thank you, Kersey replied. Now you two go get warm and get some rest.
Oh, thank God,
Kowalski huffed. The captain smirked. Soldier? He prompted. The sniper rolled his eyes.
Oh, thank God, sir, he yelled.
Better, Kersey teased. Get a move on. The 2 snipers rushed off to the warmth of the factory as the captain continued towards the other gate. As he went, he looked around at the civilians and soldiers alike, reinforcing the walls and putting up interior defenses. There were sandbags, gunner positions, some welders putting metal sheeting into place. Kersey knew if the walls were breached that it would be a lost cause, but putting up the defenses would not only increase the morale of the men, but make sure that whoever decided to try to take the place would pay a heavy price. As he approached the truck entrance gate, a civilian used a forklift to hoist the heavy metal up off of the ground to get it into position for repair. Copeland shouted instructions while Dawson supervised. Sergeant, Kersey said, and Copeland gave Dawson a pat on the shoulder to let him know to take over.
Morning, Captain,
he said as he sauntered over. Kersey nodded. Looks like you're making good progress there, he said.
Yes, sir.
This gate will be fully operational by sundown today, Copeland promised. The captain nodded again. Good to hear, he said. What about the facility's defenses?
Still fine-tuning it, sir,
came the reply. You no doubt saw the interior defensive positions. Kersey inclined his head. I did, he said. I have similar positions being installed along the catwalk, both inside and outside the factory, Copeland explained. While doing inventory, we located some heavy metal plates that we are installing. Might not be entirely bulletproof, but should give our shooters some added protection should anybody try to shoot them from below. Every little bit helps, Kersey assured him. Copeland nodded. That it does, he agreed. How are we doing with manpower? The captain asked, crossing his arms. Copeland straightened his shoulder. Civilians are doing a great job filling in our knowledge gap, getting this place up and running again, he said. And a few people, like our forklift driver there, are freeing up manpower. Do you have what you need here to defend this site? Kersey asked the million-dollar question. The sergeant took a deep breath. I'd like to have more, but I know that's not exactly a realistic possibility at the moment, he replied. No, I'm afraid we are on our own out here, Kersey agreed, shaking his head. If you want more soldiers, you're going to have to train them. Copeland pursed his lips for a moment. I know you say that in jest, he said slowly. but it might be worthwhile to train up those who are interested, for the town defense only. Don't want to put them in harm's way if I can avoid it. We need to keep Kuna neutral for their protection, Kersey reminded him. The sergeant nodded. I understand, sir, and I will do that, he promised. You should know that we do have some people there to help strengthen their defenses. I know, Kersey said. It's a risk, but it's the least we could do after subjecting them to so much over the last week. How many do we have there? Copeland counted off on his fingers. 6 men, he replied. They tell me they should have that town fortified within a week, although if Yvonne keeps feeding them the way she does, that deadline might get pushed out a day or two. Kersey laughed. Well, if you transfer anybody there, make sure my name is at the top of the list, he instructed. That's an order. Copeland chuckled. Yes, sir, he said with a wink. How are the other facilities looking? Kersey asked. The sergeant shook his head. The general was only able to send us 60 men, sir, he replied. Between the snipers, the zombie diversion teams, and the Kuna team, didn't leave a whole lot left over. I have a team of 6 working to bring vital raw material here, and locking down the facilities as best they can. He took a deep breath. This is the most state-of-the-art facility we have, and if I'm being honest, with the raw material we have access to, it's not going to take long to burn through it with only a single factory. Still, having some fallback options isn't a bad thing, Kersey mused. Copeland nodded. Agreed, he said. The captain contemplated for a moment before raising a hand. Sergeant, have that team stop what they're doing and go find a nondescript, out-of-the-way warehouse, he instructed. Have them move the secured raw material there. Once they have it locked down, that's their new position. Copeland nodded. Yes, sir, he said. I don't like the idea of putting all our eggs in one basket, Kersey explained. I'll get it done, sir, Copeland promised. Thank you, Sergeant, Kersey said, inclining his head, and gave Copeland a clap on the shoulder before heading back towards the warmth of the factory.
Captain Kersey,
a voice came through his radio.
We have incoming from Sector 3 to the west.
He stopped walking and replied, What do you have?
Single truck, flying a white flag.
The sniper reported, and Kersey stiffened. How far out? He asked.
3 miles.
The sniper reported. Kersey contemplated for a moment, weighing his options.
Sir, what are your orders?
The sniper prompted. Coming out to meet them, the captain replied. Do not fire unless they fire first, or if a fleet of vehicles are headed our way.
Yes, sir,
the sniper replied. Kersey jogged back towards Copeland, causing the sergeant to turn and furrow his brow. Captain? Copeland asked. You're with me, Kersey said. Let's move. The 2 men ran out the gate and hopped into a pickup truck near the entrance. Kersey quickly fired it up and threw it into gear, tearing off towards the incoming vehicle. What we got, Captain? Copeland asked. Kersey shook his head. My guess is nothing good, he muttered. The 2 men got out to the road and hightailed it towards the vehicle. Soon they spotted it in the distance, flying a large white flag. It took several moments to reach it, and both vehicles came to a stop about 15 yards from one another. There was a tense moment where nobody in the flag vehicle got out, putting the soldiers on edge. Finally, the driver's side door opened, and Wayne emerged. He held up a handgun and then tossed it back into the vehicle, before doing a spin to show he was unarmed. Join me, Sergeant, Kersey said. No weapons. Yes, sir, Copeland replied. The 2 soldiers got out of the vehicle and did their own maneuvers, spinning to show they were unarmed. Captain, my friend, good to see you again, Wade declared with a flourish. And my 50 cal friend from above, whose name I didn't quite catch. Sergeant Copeland, he replied stiffly. Sergeant, Wayne bellowed, spreading his arms. A captain and a sergeant coming out to greet me on this glorious day. Tell me, Captain, are you enjoying the weather in our part of the world? Kersey shrugged. Always wanted to build a snowman, he replied. Might get to check that off the bucket list today. Well, let me tell you from experience, Captain. If you have enough time, Mother Nature will provide you with more than enough resources for you to build an entire snow army, Wayne said with a wink. Kersey nodded. Good to know, he said. Wayne looked past them towards the factory at the hotbed of activity. Looks like you have quite the collection of people over there, Captain. he drawled with a twinkle in his eye.
"If I didn't know better, I'd swear you had some civilians working with you. They wouldn't happen to be from Kuna, would they?"
Despite the hint of warning in his opponent's voice, Kersey stayed strong, and knew he had to be straightforward and honest. "Some of them are, yes," he admitted, "and some of my men are in Kuna as we speak. They agreed to help us get the factory up and running again, and in exchange we are helping them repair the damage done to their defenses while helping us fight off Ted Harris and the Chosen. But my statement the other day stands. They are not in the game and not to be bothered." Wayne playfully raised his hands, smiling.
Captain, you have me all wrong," he drawled. "I'm not trying to catch you in a gotcha moment. The game still hasn't even begun yet. This is still pre-game warm-ups. But I do want to ask, do you think you will have everything you need to get done wrapped up in a week?"
"A week is fair," Kersey said slowly, cocking a brow. He wasn't sure he liked where this conversation was going.
"Good. I shall be able to sell that to the others in the group," Wayne said, jamming one of his thumbs into his belt. "Some weren't too happy with the way things were left between us, but I still hold enough sway within the ranks to get stuff like this done."
Copeland bristled. "So you came out all this way to threaten us?" he asked.
No, my sergeant friend," Wayne replied, waving a hand. "Nobody is threatening anybody here. We're just having a friendly chat about what's coming down the pipeline from forces neither of us can stop. In fact, we got a little sidetracked from the reason for my visit."
He reached for the truck and then paused.
"I just gotta reach inside here, just to the dash. Not trying anything."
"You're good," Kersey said, inclining his head for him to continue. Wayne ducked inside and emerged with a large manila envelope. He took several steps forward before tossing it to Kersey, who caught it and held it tight as the other man sauntered back towards his vehicle. "What's this?" the captain asked carefully.
"Just thought you should have proof that I'm a man of my word," Wayne said with a wink. "Give my best to Cowboy, and make sure he sees that. I get the sense he'll like it."
He put a leg in his truck and gave the soldiers a grin.
"Enjoy the snowfall, Captain. Hope you get time to build your snowman. See you real soon."
He got back into the truck and turned around, peeling out and heading back the way he'd come. Kersey dialed up his communicator. "We're all clear," he said.
"Copy that,"
the sniper replied. The two soldiers stood in the snow, watching the truck vanish over the horizon. "What do you think he meant by proof?" Copeland wondered, and Kersey took a deep breath, opening the envelope. Inside was a handful of instant photographs. The first one was Ted Harris, stripped down to nothing but ratty boxer shorts, scrubbing a toilet with a toothbrush, covered in debris. In another he was strapped to a table, a man standing behind him holding an adult toy that looked way larger than anything that should fit inside a human being.
"Yep, he is a man of his word,"
Copeland said, wrinkling his nose as he flipped through the photos.
"Might need to show these to Karen, too, given what she's been through."
Kersey handed over the photos, shaking his head. "Kowalski and Karen can see, then burn them," he instructed. "Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Copeland replied, and then cocked his head. "Are you okay, Captain? I mean, we don't have to show these photos to anybody. It's not like that man didn't deserve it." Kersey continued to stare out towards the direction Wayne had gone, finally shaking his head. "It's okay, Sergeant," he said. "I know Ted deserves everything that's happening to him. That's not what is concerning me. I'm more concerned that Wayne is very much a man of his word, and he just gave us a week before it's game on." Copeland took a deep breath. "We'd better get back then," he said, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. "Lot of stuff to get done between now and then." Kersey nodded and then got back inside. He punched the gas, speeding back towards the factory, trying not to think about the countdown clock hanging over their heads. The end. Up next, the action shifts to Seattle as the rebuild continues.